North Korea claiming to have launched its first intercontinental ballistic missile. The regime calling this its final step in its goal of creating a nuclear state that can strike anywhere in the world. And joining me now is Waleed Phares. He's a Fox News national security and foreign affairs analyst, and he has some more information for us. Thank you so much for joining us on this 4th of July.
Thank you.
So how concerned are you about this? We talked about the specifics as released by U.S. Pacific Command today. They said that the missile traveled for 37 minutes. They are claiming that it was an intermediate range ballistic missile. It landed in the Sea of Japan. But also NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, they assessed the missile launch and said that it did not pose a threat to North America. But there was at least one U.S. scientist who examined the height, the distance, and reported to at least the Associated Press that the missile could be potentially powerful enough to reach Alaska. What is your assessment?
Well, according to government, the threat did not yet reach the scope of hurting or damaging the homeland. But if you do projections, if we don't take action, both the United States, their allies, or even with China, then this technology, as we can see it right now, will develop to reach the edges of the territories of the United States. That would be Alaska, maybe parts in the Pacific, and then beyond that, the continental United States. So the projection shows us that this is their intention. So the bigger question now is, are we going to wait for them to reach that level? Or are we going to take action in terms of strategies? And the second question, that strategy, should it be American only, or should we associate our allies in the region as well?
Well, let's talk about the strategy first, though, because the UN Security Council, they've imposed sanctions on North Korea since at least 2006. They've stiffened them in response to at least 5 nuclear tests, the long-range rocket launches as well. Pyongyang, though, they continue to threaten yet another nuclear test. You see what they just did yesterday. They don't seem to care about sanctions. They don't seem to work. What do we need to do?
You're right. Sanctions alone never works. You have to have something else, either from the outside, meaning a military pressure, or deterrence, or from the inside, an uprising, as was the case, for example, when the Soviet Union collapsed, or as has been the case in many other places. But the United States at this point in time will have to make a choice, because the technology of North Korea shows that they are closer than ever to reach the homeland. So now the time factor is becoming very important. One scenario, if we do have enough technology to actually, stop the North Koreans from threatening us, which is something we cannot answer because we don't have that information. I don't have that information. But what we know is that if the United States, South Korea, Japan, other allies combined would present a deterrence to North Korea, this is a language that they would understand. Well, of course, you have China as well as another possibility.
And we know that President Trump, Sunday or yesterday, he spoke with both China, he spoke with the Prime Minister of Japan, he also had a meeting with South Korea's new president. China, 90% of North Korea's trade comes through China. So how important is it for all 3 of those Asian leaders to cooperate and work together, specifically China?
Well, first of all, we need to have a proper strategy with our allies, those with whom we have relationship. That would be Japan, South Korea, maybe others in the region. But at the same time, that bloc plus China has a lot of leverage on North Korea. But the bigger question, Heather, is what's in it for China? I mean, would China accept to collapse, to topple that regime, and then South Korea will be the one to benefit, or pro-Western forces will be the one to benefit? Of course not. So the negotiations between the 2 leaders, our president and the Chinese president, are crucial in this matter. They're going to be talking about what would be the situation if that threat is eliminated by China. And that is where the Chinese will have to impose their conditions.
And you and I have spoken, I believe, before about China not even paying attention to or adhering to some of the sanctions as they stand right now.
They're not adhering to these sanctions because they know if they do, then that will be very serious for the North Koreans. But it seems to me and some observers that the Chinese want something from the United States elsewhere. Meaning this is a bargaining chip between the U.S. and China. China will say, look, I'll help you in North Korea, But, you know, don't pressure me too much in other areas. Which areas? South China Sea, other places in Africa? It's to be seen.
You know, and to put it in perspective, and I want to make sure that I get this correctly, back in May, there was a missile launch, and the Pentagon says that that ballistic missile launch in May flew 1,000 miles higher than NASA's International Space Station. This one, the most recent one, was higher and longer than that one. So it's definitely reason to be concerned. Waleed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Happy 4th.
Well, little Charlie Grad, have you heard about him? He's a terminally ill baby in London. He is suffering from a rare genetic disease that has left him deaf and blind. But some say there is hope for that little child. Coming up, the global crusade that could save his life, and it includes President Trump.
Plus, the war in Afghanistan, it has spanned 3 presidencies with no end in sight. How the Trump administration is now looking to fix what some say are former President Obama's military mistakes.
In a sense, what I see this decision by President Trump as potentially doing is repairing one of the holes in the Obama strategy.
Well, in London, there is an 11-month-old baby who has an extremely rare genetic disease. His name is Charlie Grad. Charlie is deaf and blind. He also cannot breathe or move on his own. And in a desperate attempt to try and save his life, Charlie's parents want to move him here to the States for a chance to try to do just that. Because the British hospital where Charlie is wants to take him off life support. And President Trump has now shown support for little Charlie. Benjamin Hall is live in London with the very latest on this development. Hi, Benjamin.
Hi, good morning, Eric. You know, this is a tragic story. It effectively pits legal institutions, medical institutions who think one way against Charlie Gard's parents, who obviously have their own wishes and hopes for him and his young life. Charlie Gard is about to turn only 11 months old, and he was born with a very rare genetic disease, which means he's blind, he's deaf, he can't breathe on his own. He's currently on life support in London, and doctors and the courts have now determined that it is time to take him off that life support and allow him to die. It has echoes of the Terry Schiavo case. Last week, his parents lost their final bid to take Charlie to the US for experimental therapy. It was his last hope, but British and European courts blocked them, ruling that continued treatment would cause significant harm to Charlie. But his parents have said their right to choose has also been taken away from them.
He will fight, he'd fight to the very end, and he's still fighting, but we're not allowed to fight for him anymore. Our parental rights have been stripped away. We can't even take our own son home to die.
And, you know, they've raised $1.7 million. This is not a matter of money. This is the courts determining that it would not be in the best interest of the child. And so a big legal dispute currently going on at the moment here. Eric?
You know, it is just heartbreaking. I mean, just tugs at your emotions, what those parents are going through. And it's getting a lot of attention around the world, including from the president.
That's right. Some of the most powerful people in the world have come to the aid of Charlie Gard in this sense. You mentioned the president there. He tweeted out just yesterday his support, saying, if we can help little Charlie Gard, as per our friends in the UK and the Pope, we would be delighted to do so. And that's after the Vatican had also intervened, with Pope Francis praying that the hospital allows Charlie's parents to accompany and treat their child until the end. So support across the world coming out, and there's a very complicated legal dispute, but it's just a tragic story all round, and they're trying to get through it here. Eric?
All right, thank you very much, Benjamin. Of course.
Well, more than 15 years of war and counting in Afghanistan. And now the Trump administration is drawing up a new military plan that could put more American boots on the ground. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon with more.
When the U.S. and its NATO allies invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, the war was supposed to be lightning fast, led by U.S. Special Forces and Marine units hoping to kill bin Laden and overthrow the Taliban, who had given al-Qaeda a safe haven from which to attack the United States. 16 years later, with no end in sight, the Pentagon, and now a third U.S. president, is planning to send more troops to Afghanistan after President Obama failed to end what has now surpassed surpassed Vietnam as America's longest war. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, landed in Kabul to assess whether to commit up to 5,000 more troops in the coming months. The head of the Marine Corps, General Robert Neller, visited Helmand Province to make his assessment last week. U.S. Marines pulled out of Helmand in 2014. The U.S. currently has 8,400 troops serving in Afghanistan, a far cry from the 100,000 at its height in 2009, when President Obama was convinced by his military commanders to surge 30,000 more forces into what had been dubbed the Forgotten War, after resources and attention had been diverted to Iraq. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis offered this frank assessment of the war in recent testimony on Capitol Hill.
We're not winning in Afghanistan right now, and we will correct this as soon as possible.
Mattis said he will present a new plan for Afghanistan and the region in mid-July. His predecessor had the following warning.
You have to worry about this safe haven in Pakistan, in which terrorists go back and forth across the border at will and are able to attack in Afghanistan and then retreat back to Pakistan. That has to end. That has to be stopped.
In February, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan told Congress he needed a few thousand more troops after then-President Obama ordered roughly 1,500 U.S. troops out of Afghanistan at the end of December in an effort to end the war.
We skipped the step where you're supposed to be able to have a few dozen teams of advisors out in the field with key Afghan units to help them improve, to call in airstrikes and so forth. And so in a sense, what I see this decision by President Trump as potentially doing is repairing one of the holes in the Obama strategy.
Officials say the new strategy in Afghanistan will look like the current fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. More troops closer to the fight to call in airstrikes and embed them with local fighters. But this new plan carries risk. Earlier this month, 3 U.S. soldiers were killed by an Afghan soldier in what the military calls an insider attack. 7 other American soldiers were shot and wounded in a similar incident a week later. More than 2,300 American troops have been killed in Afghanistan, 17,000 wounded.
After multiple strategy reviews, there are still issues that after years of war have not been addressed. For instance, what to do about the ongoing threat from Afghan troops who have turned their weapons on American troops with alarming regularity. At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
Well, meanwhile, yet another launch by North Korea vividly demonstrates how that country is building up its missile program. But could they also be helping terrorists and Tehran do the same?
Plus, America's ailing roads and bridges could get a facelift, but, of course, it's going to cost Americans a bundle. We'll tell you what President Trump is considering.
And we have an update on a Fox News alert. North Korea, as we've been reporting, claiming to have launched its first intercontinental ballistic missile. One that some experts say, well, they fear it potentially could reach Alaska, though this one did not certainly launch that far, just over or under 600 miles or so. But this latest development is raising renewed concerns about Kim Jong-un's regime's possible ties to Iran. You know, the largest Iranian opposition group, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, has charged that North Korean experts are helping the Islamic government in Tehran develop Iranian ballistic missiles. That report also showing Iran's missile program has accelerated in the last 2 years. So how do we deal with this apparent double threat of Pyongyang and Tehran together? Joining us now is Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis, who's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and is spending, well, at least some of July 4th weekend here in New York. Welcome to the studio, Congressman.
Good to be here.
George W. Bush, the president, warned about the axis of evil. And if there ever is one, you've got these two countries together potentially working. What do you make of North Korean experts in Tehran helping the Iranians?
Well, in some ways, it's not surprising. If you go back last decade when Syria was building a nuclear reactor, which the Israelis, although they don't necessarily admit it, took out, North Korea was the leading force behind helping Syria develop a nuclear reactor. Just imagine how bad that crisis would be now if Assad was armed with nuclear weapons. So I think what they're doing in Iran is similar to what they were doing in Syria, and it is cause for concern because Syria was progressing very quickly with the help of the North Koreans.
Yeah, we've seen this around the world. So how do we deal with their proliferation, with North Korean proliferation, where they apparently will sell their technology to almost anybody?
Well, it's a huge problem. Obviously, we're dealing with North Korea in and of themselves. And this latest test, although the U.S. government doesn't think it's quite an ICBM, is still very cause for concern. And the greater the capacity with their missiles, the more danger American interests are. And then obviously the continental U.S. eventually. So it's a huge problem. If you look at a state like Iran, who in some ways would even be more reckless with that kind of material than even North Korea would be, that is a huge threat to the Middle East, and it's a huge threat to America's interests.
What can we do about it, do you think? We've tried sanctions. The UN has tried sanctions. The U.S. has had that. The Clinton administration had the Oil for Food program where they made a deal and the North Koreans lied about that. So more pressure on China, that's not working.
Well, I think you have to, there's really only three ways. You can just do economic, diplomatic, political pressure. Very difficult to get that. You got to convince Kim Jong-un that his regime will live longer if they don't go the nuclear route than if they do. I think he's made the calculation. Nukes really will keep him in power. So it's tough to see that working. But then the other hand, a military option, there's a whole host of problems with that because we have 60,000 troops in Seoul. You have millions of people there. Obviously, Japan, that could really get ugly very quickly. It would be great if he was deposed by forces inside the country, but this is a totalitarian country. He rules it with an iron fist. So there's no easy answer for this problem.
So what do you think then, what possible answer could there be? It's been called the choice of lousy options because he's not apparently going anywhere. He sees, like Gaddafi, what happened when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear arsenal. He sees Gaddafi as an example of someone that he wouldn't want to go that route. So there really, in that sense, is a status quo answer unless China steps up to the plate a little more, and there's no evidence they're doing that.
Well, I think that what we've typically done with China is do a little bit of pressure, then some other things happen, then China goes back. And I think the president, by him consistently bringing this up in his tweets, I think that shows that the president is committed to continually putting pressure on China. There's a whole other bunch of issues that we deal with China on that I think they would love to have cooperation.
And when does it get to the point that Beijing says, enough? They don't want a reunified peninsula, but at the same time, they don't want refugees flowing over the border. And they don't want a hostile government, if that's possible at all, next door.
Once we convince China, the president convinces China, they have more to lose by the status quo than they do by working with us to really put North Korea back in the box. The things you mentioned, they fear those, but I think if we can show them and then take action where they see that it's better to work with us, work with Japan, work with the South Koreans, to put, Kim Jong-un he's a plump kid. He's irrational in the sense he wants to hold on power, but I think how he makes these calculations would not be the way that other leaders would do. And so I think in that sense, he's very dangerous.
Yeah, and not only that, but survival perhaps is foremost in his mind. And if he can get that calculation and understand that it's his survival at stake, maybe they would step back. Ron DeSantis, Congressman, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you for joining us.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July, and have a good holiday.
Will do.
Heather?
And as you were speaking, we have this breaking development, this coming in from both China and Russia. They have a proposal. They're proposing that Pyongyang halt all nuclear and missile tests, but also that the U.S. and South Korea refrain from large-scale drills. So as we continue to get some more information on this breaking development, according to the Associated Press, we will bring it to you and get reaction as well. Back at home, President Trump is considering a hike in the federal gas tax, a move aimed at repairing America's roads and bridges. It is something that several states have already done. Ellison Barber's live for us in Washington with those details. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Heather. President Trump said that he'd consider raising the federal gas tax during an interview with Bloomberg News in May, but his spokesperson, Sean Spicer, quickly backtracked away from that.
He expressed that a group that had met with him expressed support with it and that he, out of respect, would consider their request. That's it. There was no endorsement of it. People ask the president all the time, please consider the following policy, and he has an open mind. There are people on both sides of the aisle, different backgrounds, that come in to see the president and ask him, could you please consider this? Will you keep an open mind on it? And I think that's, frankly, what the president was doing.
The last time they raised the federal gas tax, it was 1993.
The gas tax essentially finances the Highway Trust Fund. It's the most significant source of funding for building and improving federal highways.
States have their own gas tax as well, and a number of places like Montana and South Carolina have increased theirs in recent weeks. If you're getting regular gas, most Americans pay about 50 cents in state and federal taxes on every gallon. The American Petroleum Institute says for diesel, the average is 55 cents per gallon. Heather?
So does anyone in Congress support increasing the federal gas tax?
Well, Republican senators like John Barrasso from Wyoming have said they do not support increasing it. Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have also been against it in the past. There tends to be more support for it on the left. But one Republican from South Carolina, Representative Tom Rice, actually introduced a bill back in 2015 to increase the gas tax. So if you're driving today, though, your gas is actually cheaper than it was this time last year. AAA says more people are traveling this holiday weekend than any other 4th of July in the past. And on average, gas is 4 cents cheaper than it was last year. Heather?
All right. Well, important to end on the good news. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a happy 4th.
Well, you saw this picture. You know, Governor Chris Christie and his family gotten caught lounging on the beach. Well, now the budget has been passed in New Jersey, so everybody can join the governor's family on that beach that was closed yesterday. But while the folks in the Garden State are celebrating, did you know that nearly a dozen other states right now do not have a budget in place? How's that possible? Don't we send these people to the state legislators to get the work done? We'll take a look why coming up next.
Well, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie ending his state's shutdown after getting heat for the picture of him enjoying the beach. We've all seen it by now, while the budget impasse kept a lot of people off the Jersey shore. Christie's shrugging all of this off, saying that the picture isn't a big deal, no big deal. But what really is the big deal is possibly that 10 other states don't have budgets in place. How can that be? Let's bring in our panel, Republican strategist and co-chair for the pro-Trump Great America PAC, Eric Beach, and host of the Last Podcast on the Left, political commentator Ben Kissel. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, so you can probably guess who I'm going to start with since we're talking about a beach, Eric. So your response to this, I mean, was Chris Christie left with a whole lot of options after he was busted on the beach in terms of negotiating this deal? I mean, did he pretty much have to come to an agreement after this?
Sure. Well, befitting you bring Eric Beach in for Beachgate, Heather. Happy 4th to you. No, well, look, at the end of the day, you know, he signed the budget, and this has been a long chain of a negotiating ploy by him to, you know, the Assembly Speaker. But the real issue is, you know, 242 years later, in fighting the Revolutionary War, we fought over taxation without representation. And in many states across the country, and even federally, you know, we still see that today, where, you know, we have these tax and spend Democrats or liberals that keep wanting to spend, but there's no control over it. And so you have these Republican governors, or in so many states like my state, California, where you have a minority that's able to, you know, try to help reduce that spending or even roll that back. You know, we have to keep fighting that good fight because right now it's out of control.
Yeah, back to the Revolutionary War, we weren't dealing with, what, $34.7 billion budgets, which is what Jersey was dealing with. Ben, before I get your comment, listen to what the governor had to say. Not apologetic at all.
I understand it's a holiday weekend and the news channels don't have anything else to cover. Now, if they had flown that plane over that beach and I was sitting next to a 25-year-old blonde in that beach chair next to me, that's a story. I wasn't sitting next to a 25-year-old blonde. I was sitting next to my wife of 31 years.
Ouch. And a baseball cap, so he didn't get any sun, Ben.
Yeah, I heard that. You know, it's incredible. He's managed to aggravate his constituents both on land with Bridgegate and now on sea with Beachgate, which is why he is currently at around 15% approval rating, making him one of the most disliked governors in the modern era. And it really is upsetting to the people, to the constituents in New Jersey when they see their government not functioning, and all they get is a series of excuses. Basketball players can't complain that the hoop is too high. Football players can't complain that the field is too long. And politicians have to stop complaining that they're not able to compromise. At the end of the day, those beaches belong to the people of New Jersey, just like the roads that they were driving on during Bridgegate.
Yeah, well, hopefully, since they came to this agreement, most people are back out on those beaches today for the July 4th holiday. Both Maine and New Jersey came to an agreement, but Illinois still under this partial government shutdown. They have not agreed yet, and Illinois is the 5th largest U.S. state, more than 12 million people impacted by this one. So in terms of the largest expenses that the states have to deal with, Eric, what's the biggest problem that they're facing right now?
Well, I mean, there's so uncertainty around the health care debate. I mean, Obamacare really left us with a social program.
The health care debate, infrastructure still out there, that plan?
And even education, right? A lot of times in education, we're funding these state education budgets, and they're going to, the public service unions as opposed to really going, to the students themselves. And so, really, this is boiled down to failed policies over the last 50 years. We see this also in America's major cities. And at some point in time, voters need to stop rewarding these legislators and these bureaucrats that just keep tax and spending when there's not results to be had.
Yeah, Ben, we have to have a budget. We have to keep ourselves in check, or at least we're supposed to, or else we get in trouble. So why don't they?
It's two set of standards, and there was nothing more obvious that there was two different realities that these politicians and their constituents are living in, and that's what happened with when it comes to the optics of the photo of Chris Christie and his family on the beach as his residents, as his constituents were forced to be off the beach. So they live in two different realities, and that's really what is aggravating the American people, both on a national level and on a state level.
Yeah, I have to give our floor director Dave credit for this. A wave of controversy and opinions following that picture. Thank you both for joining us. Happy 4th to both of you.
Happy 4th. Thank you.
Happy 4th.
Bye-bye.
Well, Fox News is celebrating our nation's birthday by putting the spotlight on proud Americans everywhere. And our Anna Koyman is live in Southport, North Carolina. There she is from down under. Anna will join us next.
This Fox News alert for you. We have just learned when this meeting between Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump will happen, along with the G20 summit. The meeting is now, we're told, set for Friday afternoon. Of course, a lot of conversations been about what will they talk about, primarily Syria and Ukraine, whether or not the situation with the United States election and possible hacking will be brought up remains to be seen. But once again, we know the meeting now between Putin and Trump will happen Friday afternoon.
Well, it's become a tradition here at Fox News Channel every 4th of July. We celebrate being proud Americans. And Anna Koyman is live in beautiful Southport, North Carolina, with one town's marking of our independence. Hi, Anna.
Good morning, Eric and Heather. Good morning to everybody at home. We are in Southport, North Carolina. Now, this town is normally just a few thousand people, but every year around Independence Day, it swells to about 50,000 people. And some festival organizers are saying it may be even bigger this year because Fox News is taking over the town. We've done this 3 years before. We were in Nashville last year, Charleston the year before, Centerville, Ohio the year before that. And we're hoping this will be the best year yet. Check out my new float. Our sponsor there, Navy Federal Credit Union, Fox News, Proud American. We're asking everybody at home to use that hashtag, Proud American. Send us your pictures, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Use that hashtag. We'll be sharing those throughout the day on social media and on some of our programming. Now, yesterday, we got to experience some very special moments with 100 newly minted Americans. Let's take a look at this naturalization ceremony that took place.
The United States was always for me a country and the people of the United States to love.
So when you sing songs and hear songs, just proud to be an American or the Star Spangled Banner, does it have a new meaning for you today?
It has a different meaning. I think it makes me even more proud than I was before. I'm proud to be a part of the country that freed my country years ago. During World War II, my parents and grandparents, both sides, got deported by the Nazis, and they were freed by the Americans. And so we always looked up to our liberators.
And they represent 48 countries from around the world, and all of us at Fox News would like to be some of the very first to say a big congratulations, and we hope you're proud Americans today. Back to you, Eric.
Absolutely.
And Heather.
Congratulations to them. Certainly renews our faith in our nation. Anna, terrific. And we will be right back with more at the top of the hour. Stay with us on this Independence Day.
A Fox News alert for you with North Korea test firing another missile, this time claiming that it was an intercontinental ballistic missile. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Heather Childers on this 4th of July.
Yes, it is. Hi, Heather.
Yeah.
And hello, everyone. I'm Eric. Sean, Bill, and Shannon are off on this holiday week. Well, while the U.S. is now trying to analyze this newest launch and what it means, its implications, some experts are predicting that Kim Jong-un's regime now has the capability of potentially hitting Hawaii and Alaska. President Trump has responded to this launch on Twitter, saying, quote, North Korea has just launched another missile. Does this guy have anything better to do with his life? Hard to believe that South Korea and Japan will put up with this much longer. Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all.
So let's get the very latest from Lucas Tomlinson. He is in the Pentagon with more. Hi, Lucas.
Well, good morning, Heather. This was a record-setting missile test for North Korea. The missile flew longer and higher than any to date. Some analysts say North Korea now has the ability to strike Alaska, something senior officials have long feared.
The threat is much more immediate now. And so it's clear that we can't repeat the same approach, failed approach of the past. So the president has directed us to not do that and to prepare a range of options, including a military option, which nobody wants to take, right?
Until last night, the longest North Korean missile flew for 30 minutes on Mother's Day, over 1,000 miles higher than NASA's International Space Station. This latest North Korean missile flew even further, 37 minutes, according to the U.S. Pacific Command. Now, North Korea says their missile tests use a much higher trajectory than a real-world launch. Missile experts say this missile could have traveled over 4,000 miles.
In my view, it's a matter of time. They're demonstrating continued increase in capability, range, altitude, and capacity. We have to assume that the capability exists today to attack the United States.
For the first time since the 90s, the Pentagon ordered 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups off the Korean peninsula last month. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta says there are other options available as well.
We do have covert capabilities. And I think it would be wise for the United States to use those covert capabilities as a way to continue to undermine the North Korean government. If they try to do anything stupid, that it could end their regime, period.
A short time ago, I learned a Chinese missile intended for space exploded 13 minutes after launch on Sunday. Another sign of the ongoing missile race going on across the globe. Heather?
Yeah, this is not fake news. This is what people should be talking about and paying attention to. Lucas, thank you.
And Heather, meanwhile, back in Washington, the majority of members of Congress, so now they've gone home to celebrate Independence Day. Well, the Senate Republicans, though, still have deadlocked on health care. And after missing the July 4th deadline of today, the chamber's leadership is now looking to the 3-week session where they hope to try and pass a Senate health care bill before the August recess on August 5th. Will they be able to do that? James Rosen is live in our Washington bureau with the developments and prognosis and if they can ever reach a deal. Hi, James.
And answers to all questions. Good morning to you, Eric and Heather. The effort to repeal and replace Obamacare remains chiefly an intra-party battle, with moderate and more conservative Republicans struggling to come to grips with each other and a legislative calendar that only leaves 33 working days before the end of the fiscal year.
There is some thought that there might be a vote next week, by the end of next week. Difficult to say, but we do need to get this thing done. We need to get it done quickly because the American people are struggling to keep up with their health care payments and to buy health care that they can actually use.
Mindful of the time pressure, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona has written to House Speaker Paul Ryan with what is for lawmakers a drastic proposal, to wit, we request that you cancel Congress's current plans to recess for the month of August to ensure there is enough time to address the long list of pressing issues on our docket. While some Senate Republicans, like Mr. Lee, whom you just saw, and Ted Cruz of Texas have proposed amendments to the current repeal and replace package, others, like Ben Sass of Nebraska, are proposing a straight-up repeal to be followed by a replace measure when the GOP can coalesce around one. The White House has expressed openness to that, but then its legislative affairs director also suggested a more ambitious timetable.
We plan to get health care completed this summer. We look to move to tax reform in the fall.
Reform first.
We need to do both, John.
But as everyone has been noting, the docket is getting stacked up. Not only did President Trump want to tackle health care, he also wanted to do tax reform. And then remember all those plans to spend $1 billion on infrastructure to fix our crumbling roads, bridges, and airports. A lot left to accomplish. Eric.
Yeah, and they've got just a month and 1 day to try and do some of that. James, thank you. Heather.
Well, as those Senate Republicans work toward a vote on a health care bill, Congress is moving to eliminate the enforcement of the unpopular provision of Obamacare, which requires Americans to pay a penalty for not having health insurance. And joining me now is Byron York. He's the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner and Fox News contributor. Thank you for joining us, Byron. Happy 4th of July to you as well. All right, so we've heard this before. We're talking about the individual mandate. Please explain to me why this is new or different, because I thought from the very beginning Republicans have been talking about this individual mandate being a problem and letting it go.
Well, the individual mandate is the heart of Obamacare. It forces people to buy insurance or pay a penalty or get some sort of waiver. And it was thought that it would make all of Obamacare work. That is, if everybody were forced to buy insurance, there would be more healthy people as well as sick people in the pool, and premiums would go down. Well, premiums didn't go down. Now, repealing the individual mandate is part of the bill that the House passed to repeal and replace Obamacare. It is part and will be part of any bill that the Senate passes, if they do, to repeal and replace Obamacare. But what if that doesn't happen? What you see now is an effort in the House to repeal that individual mandate. Not all of Obamacare, but just that individual mandate. Repeal that in a bill that has to be passed to fund the Treasury Department. So that's a different way of going after the mandate than an overall repeal and replace bill.
Okay, so what problems do you foresee if they try to go that route?
Maybe not a lot of problems. The individual mandate is the least popular part of Obamacare. We have years of polling of individual parts of Obamacare. Do you like the pre-existing conditions clause? Do you like to keep your child in your insurance till they're 26? Those are very popular parts. The individual mandate is a really unpopular part. So the House right now is going after something that they know most voters, not just Republicans, most voters don't like.
And how would that impact the CBO score? Because I know that I've spoken with a couple of experts in the past, and they said that directly impacts the CBO score because they have to base that score on current law, and then the current law obviously includes the individual mandate.
It would impact it. It might not be that huge because the sort of dirty little secret of the individual mandate is it hasn't been all that much enforced. The Democratic Congress that passed Obamacare did not put any sort of enforcement mechanism in it. If you don't pay it, you can't be sent to jail, you can't be fined. And so a lot of people don't pay it. They handed out a lot of waivers, people who said they couldn't pay the fine. And on the very first day of the Trump administration, the president issued an executive order that basically laid off all enforcement. On the other hand, in the most recent year we have, 2015, 6.5 million people did pay a penalty for the individual mandate. It was $3 billion. So it's not nothing, and it would affect the estimate to some degree.
All right. Well, like you said, it's not nothing. It is something. Thank you so much, Byron. Appreciate it. Have a happy 4th.
Thank you, Heather.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Well, meanwhile, Heather, we're watching to see what the Trump administration will do next about North Korea's latest missile launch. Ambassador John Bolton is here to analyze U.S. strategy.
Plus, dozens of states are pushing back against the administration in its quest for information about your voting history. We'll take a look at the backlash.
And reuniting wounded warriors and other vets with their loved ones. We have a very special story. Hear from the man who's at the helm of Luke's Wings and one hero that he helped. And our Fox is alert with the latest on that launch by North Korea of a missile that it claims is an intercontinental ballistic missile. But so far, we have no confirmation of that. But this latest launch does have experts worried. Some fear that the regime of Kim Jong-un could now potentially have the technical capability to hit us, the United States, specifically Hawaii and Alaska. So after years of trying to deter North Korea's missile program to no avail, what can we do now to de-escalate the situation, if anything? John Bolton joins us, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York, and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, the very latest is that Russia and China are now proposing that Pyongyang halt nuclear and missile tests if, this is the if, the U.S. and South Korea refrain from, the large-scale joint military exercises. I mean, that's the trade-off that Moscow and Beijing are floating. Is that even realistic?
No, that's just as ridiculous as that proposal has always been. It's a favorite of North Korea's, and it's not going to go anywhere. The exercises that we hold annually are not a threat to North Korea. The threat to international peace and security is North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program, and that's what we need to deal with seriously. I'm actually distressed that China and Russia have put that idea forward again. It's an old chestnut. It didn't work before. It's not going to work now.
Well, with that type of proposal, I mean, they clearly are siding with Kim Jong-un and basically not with the world community to try to do something about this.
Well, as they have, in effect, for 25 years. I mean, we're paying the price now of a series of not very attractive options because of having believed for 25 years that some combination of negotiation and sanctions would get North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons program, and it hasn't happened. The Chinese and Russians, at best you can say, they turned their heads as sanctions were violated, and North Korea got the wherewithal to continue the nuclear and missile programs. And many believe that Chinese and in particular entities have been aiding North Korea right along. So I think we've got to break out of the bubble we've been in for 25 years that's cost us. Time is always on the side of the proliferator, and we can see the consequences. North Korea gets closer and closer to being able to hit the United States.
So you talk about that bubble. I mean, look, in 1994, the Clinton administration had that oil for food swap where North Korea promised not to do this, and they certainly broke that. President George W. Bush removed North Korea from the state-sponsor list of countries that sponsor terrorism. That was an olive branch. And instead, we obviously get slapped back, and Kim Jong-un continues to proliferate and test missiles. So what type of combination of action do you think is needed, is necessary, and can work to try and rein him in?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is come to the conclusion that this effort of carrots and sticks, one of the State Department's favorite phrases, negotiation and coercion, economically has failed. So if it's failed for 25 years, I want to hear from somebody some good reason why it will begin to succeed in year 26. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's really only one diplomatic initiative open here, and that's to tell China that they need to face up to the reality that a nuclear North Korea is not in their interest, which they say is their policy, but which they've never implemented, and that indeed the real problem is North Korea's continued existence. China will only act out of self-interest, and its self-interest in making sure Japan doesn't go nuclear is to agree to reunite the peninsula. If that fails, and it could well fail, then we're looking at some very unattractive military options. Everybody acknowledges that if we had to attack North Korea, or if conflict broke out there for any reason, there'd be a lot of tragic civilian casualties. The people should bear in mind, the President of the United States has as his highest objective protecting innocent American civilians, and you have an essentially irrational regime in Pyongyang getting very close to the capability of hitting the United States with nuclear weapons. That is unacceptable.
And what if I heard you right, you're potentially saying that maybe Japan could potentially say that they're going nuclear, or at least go down that road, and that would be the leverage needed for Beijing to try and put pressure on Pyongyang?
Well, I hope we don't have to go that way. That is what proliferation means. Each country that gets nuclear weapons inspires others to do it as well. But China's been jiving us for 25 years. They keep saying they don't want North Korea with nuclear weapons. Look, they've exploded 5 nuclear devices. They're perfecting their ballistic missile technology. I don't think China's blind to this. I think they know exactly what North Korea is up to. Just the Chinese aren't willing to play their part. And I think you got to have, as apparently the president did on Sunday night, very serious conversations with the Chinese. We need a long-term solution to this. The long-term solution is to reunite the peninsula.
And finally, very quickly, what do you think will make the Chinese actually change strategy?
I think they need to hear from the United States that we're not going to go down this road of fake negotiations with North Korea as we have for the past 25 years, and that if we are forced to use military means to stop an attack on the United States, we will. And China will bear a lot of the consequences when millions of refugees come across the Yalu River.
Ambassador John Bolton, the administration has said that they're out of patience with North Korea, so we'll see how this develops. Good to see you. Thank you so much. And happy 4th. Of course.
Will be interesting to see what South Korea says, especially about the U.S. drills. Well, hospitals and doctors in the U.S. are seeing a shortage in low-cost medicine, and it's costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars. What's causing the problem? We'll talk about it ahead.
Well, you know, it is greatly anticipated. All eyes will be watching because the White House does confirm now that the president will be meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday. That meeting will occur at the G20 session in Germany. They will have a bilateral meeting, we're told, although the subject has not yet been released if there is a specific agenda and if the president will raise the allegations of Russian interference in the presidential election. But clearly, Syria, Ukraine, other issues will come up, and likely North Korea. That meeting set now for Friday.
We'll be watching that. Meantime, America is facing a massive shortage of low-cost medicine. Studies have estimated that these drug shortages are forcing hospitals and doctors to seek more expensive alternatives. And this is adding up to more than $400 million in annual health care cost. And joining us now is Dr. Debbie. She's an associate professor at NYU School of Medicine. Thank you for joining us on this 4th of July.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too. So what's the impact? Let's start specifically with patients.
Well, we can think about the cost, but more importantly to patients, they might have to pick riskier alternatives, right, or alternatives that aren't as effective in terms of managing their symptoms.
Yeah. And it seems like it would be the other way around, that the less expensive would be more available.
You would think so, but there's a couple different issues. So if you think about how these medications are made, right, there's a supply chain. So you have raw materials that are then manufactured into these medications and then put out there for patients, right? So you can have problems with the raw materials themselves. So we get a lot of these from other countries, not from the U.S. itself. So if there's a natural disaster in another part of the world, if there's a war that breaks out somewhere where we get these supplies, then we have a problem. I mean, this can happen with tests also. So, for example, in Canada, they make this material called technetium, which is used for some of our bone scans, right? When the plant that made that closed down in Canada, all of a sudden we couldn't offer those tests anymore. So, so you can have significant impact, things that we don't have as much control over.
So you mentioned bone scans. I mean, that seems like that's something that a lot of people have to have done for a lot of different procedures. What are some of the others that would be impacted?
Well, so there are tests, and here what we see it most in is actually medications. So with antibiotics, we're talking about generic antibiotics, chemotherapy, and anesthetics. That's where you see more of the issues. So of course we do jump to other alternatives, but there are problems because hospitals don't necessarily expect these shortages. They come up out of the blue. Then you can have problems in terms of manufacturing. So for example, these companies, you know, let's say that there's better equipment that comes out or their equipment becomes outdated. They may not have as much incentive to, you know, invest in this new equipment and invest in things for generics because maybe they can make more money off the trade name drugs,
so
right?
It's all interconnected and it all trickles down. So we've got the impact on the patients, we've got why it's happening, so what can be done to turn it around?
Well, there are some issues. So actually there's a bipartisan effort to get the FDA to be able to review different alternatives better. So they can prioritize any applications to make competitive drugs. So let's say there's only one manufacturer for a particular medication. Well, if there are applications to have competitors make that same thing, then maybe the shortage wouldn't be as much of an issue.
So less of a monopoly.
Exactly.
Okay. So what is the possibility of that happening, and how long would that take?
Well, it's unclear, you know. So hopefully, because it's bipartisan, it's Senator McCaskill and Senator Susan Collins, hopefully then that should actually come about more quickly, but it wouldn't necessarily take care of some of the other issues that we have in terms of the manufacturing process, the FDA's regulations that exist at present, and then those raw materials as we were talking about.
The possibility of more competition, at least as a beginning point, to make it
as a
better.
backup.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Debbie. Appreciate it.
Oh, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Eric?
Well, meanwhile, Heather and Debbie, dozens of state officials are saying, hold on just a sec, before sending your voter history to the Trump administration. You know, many states have been refusing outright. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the president's claims of voter fraud and the commission's investigation.
I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. We lost 78 of our Army teammates that day. We took more casualties in the Pentagon on that day than in any day in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The next day, 9/12, in the morning early, walked around the Army workspaces. I knew I would find people that were hurting from the day before. On their faces was anxiety, sadness, fear, to be sure, but overwhelming determination, because they knew we were at war. When I saw that that workforce was present for duty in total, it was overwhelming for me. I said to myself, they're all here. My God, they're all here.
Share your pride on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. #ProudAmerican.
And a Fox News alert, Arizona now joining dozens of states resisting the request to supply voter data to the commission that's investigating President Trump's allegations of voter fraud. Right now, 10 states and the District of Columbia are refusing outright to cooperate at all completely. And another 23 say they will partially comply. But some state officials call the probe a sham. Is it? Or is voter fraud a widespread problem that the president claims it is? Ethan Berriman is a radio talk show host in Los Angeles. Chris Wilson served as campaign pollster for Ted Cruz and is partner of WPA Opinion Research on this. Ethan, let me start with you. I mean, do you think the president's panel is needed?
No, because there isn't a crime to investigate. This is a fishing expedition to satisfy the ego of the president, who's bruised because he lost the popular vote and wants to satisfy his tweets claiming widespread voter fraud. And it's actually fun that we're talking to my friend Chris Wilson, because in Colorado, the only evidence I saw of voter fraud was the actual Republican chair who was accused of a mail-in ballot fraud that happened there.
Well,
we just don't have the evidence.
Are you saying that, Ethan, that voter fraud doesn't happen?
I didn't say that it doesn't happen, but it happens so little that the number of prosecutions are in the single digits. We're not talking about millions of votes that are being swayed here. We're talking about very special little incidents that have happened. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
Chris, is that true?
Well, I'll give you a few examples. I mean, in Detroit, more than a third of the precincts had more votes cast and registered voters in them. A study by the nonpartisan think tank Just Facts found over 5 million illegal votes cast in 2008. Now, they haven't repeated that study because they got so much criticism on it from the left. But I would say if you can't have it both ways. Either one, voter fraud is not a problem, or two, it is, and we should go and find out whether or not it's a problem. We should work to prevent it. But if Democrats really believe this is nothing more than a fishing expedition by President Trump, then why not cooperate fully and show that he did lose the popular vote? Because as long as they continue to make these stands, and I'll tell you, it's just absurd, those stands that they're making, as if they're not going to turn over data that is fully available. My company purchases this data on an ongoing basis from all of these states and from organizations that everything that Chris Kobach and the Commission is requesting is fully available for purchase. And the only way to stamp out voter fraud is to be able to create a cooperation like this Commission is trying to do between the states, so that you can find anyone who may have been convicted of a felony in another state or any other things that would disqualify their vote.
You were looking at Chris Kobach there. He was the former Secretary of State of Kansas, now on the panel. And that 5 million figure, by the way, Chris, is suspect. PolitiFact says it's not true. It's based on an Old Dominion voter survey that I reported on, which was really an extrapolation. that found 32 people may have been non-citizens who may have voted. I mean, that got blown up.
Well, that was the one for this last year, but I mean, there was one done in 2008 that was a little more of integrity.
But there is voter fraud, and you've been shaking your head, Ethan, about that. When, shouldn't this be looked into?
Well, of course, and that is up to each individual state and how they handle voting. This is a state that's so fun making this argument. It's a states' rights issue. And by the way, yeah, that liberal bastion Mississippi has come out and said, you're not getting our voter data unless you go through the proper channels, the normal way that Chris's company does it. By the way, 3 states have come out and specifically said, you didn't even follow the rules for getting the data. And on top of it all, let's talk about the issue that our government has keeping data secure. How should I have confidence that what is states' data, the federal government is going to keep secure in a way? And by the way, one of the voting companies had a hack that happened as well. Why shouldn't I be worried about my information being secured? Why should I just be hoping that the federal government is going to do it?
You got to say that the government officials have it, but I mean, and it does happen. Let me show you Pascal Parker. We've showed him before. Mr. Parker voted 3 times in 2012 in the presidential election. Once in person in Tennessee. He was convicted of that. Also absentee ballot in North Carolina and Florida. That's not supposed to happen. And we went up to Troy, New York a number of years ago. This is how they stole elections up there. Watch this. You didn't write that.
I did not.
You didn't cast a ballot.
I did not.
Did you vote?
No.
But they have your vote at the Board of Elections.
They do.
Did you fill out an absentee ballot application?
Nope, I didn't fill out any of those.
So your vote was a fraud.
It was.
So finally, Chris, it does happen.
Well, it does, and that's the point, is you've got to have cooperation between states. And so we can say it's a states' rights issue, and I agree with that, it is. But unless you have cooperation so that you can determine what happens across each state so they can communicate back and forth, and that's really got to be coordinated by the federal government. And Kobach's letter had a couple of important aspects in it.
One is, make it quick.
Don't turn over anything that you're not allowed to turn over. But second is, it's a moral issue, because any illegal vote discounts the vote of a legal citizen or a legal vote. And that's really a problem.
I tell you, we're up against the clock. We're out of time. They will continue their investigation, and we'll see, what, if anything, they find. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Happy 4th.
Thank you.
Heather?
Well, July 4th has deep meaning, not just for our nation, but also for Israel and a victory over terrorism. We'll take you back 1 year ago, where Eric spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about losing his older brother. We'll talk about that. Plus, a terminally ill baby at the center of a worldwide debate after his parents lost a legal battle to keep him on life support. Our legal panel's here to talk about the case of 11-month-old Charlie Gard and the interest that President Trump is taking in it. Up next.
He will fight. He'd fight to the very end, and he's still fighting, but we're not allowed to fight for him anymore. Our parental rights have been stripped away. We can't even take our own son home to die.
It's just heartbreaking. 11-month-old Charlie Gard was born with an extremely rare genetic disease that has no cure. He's blind and he's deaf, and he also cannot breathe or move on his own. And now the hospital in London wants to take him off of life support. The issue has sparked a global debate, and even the Pope and the President Trump, have both weighed in. With us now is attorney Jesse Weber and National Law Journal contributor and former general counsel Kent Zimmerman. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. You bet.
I will start with you, Jesse. Explain to us briefly, if you can, where British law stands on this.
Absolutely. So all 3 courts that they tried to go to, they took it to a lower court, a middle court, and the court of last resort to try to resolve this issue about whether or not the hospital is justified in removing life support for this child. And when all of those courts ruled against them, they ruled in favor of the hospital, they took their appeal finally to the European Court of Human Rights, which does have binding authority over the UK in this instance. And they too ruled, based upon the evidence, based upon the testimony that they heard, that the prolonging Charlie's life would create increased suffering and pain for him, and it would be inhumane, particularly, as you said, he can't see, he can't hear, he can't move, he suffers from seizures, and it is their belief that prolonging his life is inhumane.
Kent, their belief being, a group of strangers versus the belief of these parents. It's really hard to believe for a lot of people here in America.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head, Heather, and this is such a heartbreaking case. I've got to tell you, my heart is with that child's parents, but I'm proud to be an American today because if this happened in America, it would be up to the doctors treating the child in consultation with the parents, and they would determine the appropriate treatment because they're closest to the child. And if one hospital didn't want to treat him here in America, they'd be able to take him to another. And that the UK government won't let the parents bring the child to the U.S. for treatment, where he's already been offered by a hospital here in the U.S. treatment, and they have the money to bring him here. It's astounding to me that it's not up to the parents whether or not they could bring him here for treatment. It's really surprising, and it's heartbreaking.
And I believe the Hospital of the Vatican has also volunteered to have him taken there. This is the statement from President Trump. If we can pull that up on Twitter, he said, "If I can help little Charlie Gard, as per our friends in the UK and the Pope, we would be delighted to do so." And then if we can also bring up the hospital's response, they're saying, together with Charlie's parents, we are putting plans in place for his care and to give them more time together as a family. Spokesman for the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, the NHS Foundation Trust, had that statement to say. So, Jesse, is it even possible that he could be brought here?
I wish, I really do wish that President Trump, who was trying to do the right thing in his tweet and provide a safe haven for them, I don't know how closely he's following the complicated legal issue of this, but he was giving them sanctuary in this country if they were able to come. Unfortunately, he has no authority over the English courts to make something happen here unless some sort of political maneuvering can be happening here to get them over here. I don't see any binding authority to allow this to happen, and which is very unfortunate because at the end of the day, it really should be, as Ken said, in what we have here in America, where courts don't want to get involved. Allow it to be between the between the parents and the doctors to decide the fate of their child.
And there's this experimental drug or possibility for the child, and even though they say that that's not really a possibility, there is, it's possible, Kent, and this is reminiscent of the Terry Schiavo case to a lot of people.
It is. And in the Terry Schiavo case, of course, that was her husband who was the guardian in a dispute with the parents. But the concept is that here in America, if there's the possibility of treatment, if there's a reason for possible hope, we generally allow the doctors and the parents to make the decision, or the doctors and the guardian in the Terry Schiavo case, to make the decision on what should happen. And what's surprising about the UK law is that it's up to judges who, as you said, Heather, never met the child, are not close to his medical care, and even though it's remote, even though the possibility of experimental treatment is remote, even though the child unfortunately sustained brain damage, it should be up to the doctors and the parents, and in my view, and I think in Jesse's view, to determine the child's future.
Yeah, why not try? Thank you both for joining us today. Appreciate it, and our hearts and prayers go out to this family. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, July 4th is not only our Independence Day, but the anniversary of a victory over terrorism. In 1976, terrorists for the Palestinian cause hijacked an Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris and forced it to land in Entebbe, Uganda. They held more than 100 passengers hostage. Then Israeli commandos flew from Israel to Uganda and stormed the terminal. All but 4 hostages were saved, and 1 Israeli commando was killed. He was Yoni, or Jonathan Netanyahu, the older brother of now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This time last year, I sat down with the Prime Minister in Jerusalem, where he poignantly remembered his brother. At the time, Netanyahu lived in Boston. He drove all night to Ithaca, New York, where his father was a professor at Cornell, to tell him about Yoni's fate.
All of a sudden, through the living room window, he sees me walking up the path, and he has this look of surprise which changed in a heartbeat. And he understood, and he understood.
He knew.
He knew, and I came in, and and I heard my mother scream, and it was actually worse than hearing about Yoni's death. It's often said that the worst thing you can do as a prime minister or as a commander in the army is to tell a family that they lost their son. But now I was telling my parents that they lost their son, my older brother. I have to say that this was the most clearly the most difficult moment in my life. I've had quite a few, but nothing like this.
You got that phone call from Ito at 2 in the morning. It's a 7-hour drive. What was going through your mind?
Torture. Torture. Anguish. It's like having your skin flayed while you're still alive.
You came back to Israel, the services, and how did you deal with that?
I don't know how we all dealt with it. I don't know where my parents found the courage to go on. I think the loss of a brother is a terrible thing. But the loss of a son is more terrible. And I often wonder about that when I talk to the bereaved families and bereaved parents of Israeli soldiers who fall while defending this country. I tell them about this. I don't speak to them as a prime minister. I speak to them as part of that same larger bereaved family.
For Netanyahu and many others, Yoni is an inspirational symbol of what we now need to face the terrorist threat.
They speak about his clarity and courage and his coolness of judgment. And I think ultimately these are the qualities that won the day.
Well, at a July 4th celebration in Tel Aviv last night, the Prime Minister said this, quote, 2 centuries separate July 4th, 1776, and July 4th, 1976. But to me, they are unified by a common ideal, the fight for freedom. I am reminded of that parallel every year at this time, Israel and America, 2 bastions of liberty defending our common civilization. It is what Yoni Netanyahu symbolizes and what we continue today.
Back at home, one organization helping reunite wounded warriors and veterans with their loved ones is offering a new service. And this Independence Day, we are hearing from one veteran receiving assistance as our Proud American coverage continues up next.
Well, this Independence Day brings more assistance to our wounded service members and veterans, particularly transportation help provided by an organization that's very special. It is called Luke's Wings. What is it? What do they do, and how do they help? Fletcher Gill is chairman of the board and CEO, and he's co-founder of Luke's Wings and joins us now from Washington. Fletcher, this is such a meaningful and special effort. Tell me what you do and how did it start?
Well, good morning and happy 4th of July. We started Luke's Wings in 2008. Our mission was to fly families in and out of military hospitals to support the recovery of our wounded warriors. In 2008, very modestly, we flew 19 family members in and out. Today, in 2017, we're doing that number of flights pretty much every 3 days, Monday through Sunday.
That is absolutely fantastic. I mean, what was the problem originally? Because you've got wounded service members, and they may not be able to see their families or in other parts of the country.
Sure, of course. Well, what a lot of people don't understand is that the government will fly 2 family members out to the bedside of a wounded warrior. They will also provide a per diem, daily assistance, so one family member can stay and take care of the wounded warrior as what's called a non-medical attendant. The problem, however, is that once that person, a mother, a wife, etc., flies home, then the coverage ends. And so the mother or the wife, as in this example, would refuse to leave because they were afraid that they couldn't come back again. They couldn't afford it. So they would quit their job, they would leave the kids with grandma, they would come out, and then they would sit there and they wouldn't leave. And so we stepped in and we said, listen, from now on, okay, you don't have to worry about that second flight, that third flight. From now on, your home is right down the street from the hospital, in the sense that we're going to provide you with as many flights as you need for as long as your loved one is recovering at Walter Reed or in any military hospital. So these days we provide flights in and out of 12 military hospitals. We provide flights for veterans in hospice care, World War II and Korea mostly right now. We provide flights for fallen officers. It's a new program for our police departments across the country that we rolled out this year. And we provide, terrific. Yes, and we provide flights for Special Operations Command. In the last 10 days, we've actually provided 8 flights to the SOF community, meaning the Special Operations Forces community. A lot of people don't realize that those guys are really in the thick of it right now.
They really are, and we are so thankful to them. And we're thankful to you and to Luke's Wings. How can folks who are watching right now, help? I mean, it's astounding. The bureaucratic red tape and these rules would force families who are going through this to before you came along, to have to resort to what they did.
Well, there's a lot of great organizations out there. We like to think we're one of them. We're currently tracking, DOD is currently tracking 60,000 wounded warriors, and those are just the ones that they know about. So right now we're doing a lot of ongoing flights for folks that are coming back and forth for, things. Chris, for example, he was going to be on with us today. We're providing him a flight to get a new eye, which is an interesting flight, but, we've been providing flights for wounded warriors that were injured even back in 2013. So the way people can help, of course, is to come to our website, www.lukeswings.org, and make a small donation. Even $1 or $2 is helpful. You'd be surprised. A flight costs about $350 to get somebody, onto an airplane and into a hospital bedside to their loved ones.
That is $350 so well spent. And we apologize, Chris Bogner, Marine Corporal, wounded by an IED. We had some technical difficulties to get him on at the moment, but we thank him for his service, and we thank you for what you're doing and the effort for Luke's Wings. So, as you said, folks, go on the website. Take a look. It is so deeply meaningful and important. Fletcher, thank you.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July, too.
Great story for this 4th. Well, North Korea claims to test a missile. We've told you about this. They claim it's capable of reaching American shores, and now Russia and China are floating a joint proposition to turn down the temperature. So, what's the White House's next move?